All right, everybody, welcome back to Culz Reviews Deep Dives, week 2 of Halloween season. Hopefully, you guys joined us last week for Halloween Town. If not, what are you guys doing? Just pause this, go back, watch that, and then come back to this one. This week, we're going to be talking another kind of classic of the Halloween season, perhaps more just the story itself rather than the movie, but that is the story of Sleepy Hollow. So we will discuss the poem a little bit. It's had other incarnations as well as a TV show, but today we are mainly focusing on Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow. Like I said, we'll go back to the poem. Has anyone else here besides me read the poem?
In like
Absolutely.
in fifth grade.
Okay. So David, what are your thoughts on the poem?
So I actually am an English major when I graduated. So this may be a hot take, but I think a lot of what is considered classic literature and such like that, absolute garbage.
Okay, good. Because
I
I
can't
was
stand a lot of it. But I will say I did enjoy this for the story. I did like it felt very different from a lot of other literature of that age. And I mean, honestly, this is one of America's first great stories. You know, it happened way back around that revolutionary time when we were still a very, very young country. So in a way, this is kind of America's first horror story.
Yeah, I was gonna say because this was written in 1820. There are parts where they're at a party and they're talking about the war, and they're talking about the Revolutionary War, which is kind of crazy to put yourself. This was what 200 years ago that this was written. Like that's insane. Now, I will say it's kind of the time as far as you could tell when it was written. If you've read a lot of older books, they definitely have a feel to them. They all kind of follow the same like voice, even though it's not the same author. And this one at times definitely felt like it was trying to go more with the poem, but it was just not. Like usually poems, I don't know, they have a certain way of going about things. But also something that I thought was funny was I'm 100% sure that the Headless Horseman did not exist. It was definitely Brahm, as far as the poem itself. He just murdered him. I don't know. That was my takeaway from reading it. David, what were your takeaways from reading that one?
I don't know. That's an interesting take about that being, kind of made into existence. But just like you were saying, how they were talking about things like the Revolutionary War and things like that. It was such a different era than where we are now that everything in it is very, very different from the way that we would live life or, just our modern day. And yet the things that are scary about the story or whatnot still kind of ring true with us even a couple hundred years later. So I think that's, definitely a testament to the story. Um, I've actually been there to Sleepy Hollow, or what was renamed Sleepy Hollow, and been to Washington Irving's grave, who wrote the poem, of course, and everything, and seen some of the locations that he wrote about in the poem. And I got to say, being there in the middle of the fall, it kind of feels like you are right there in the middle of the poem. He did such a good job of setting the scenery and everything that you could conceivably believe that there might be this killer or headless horseman that was out, running. What I think is more interesting is all of these stories and movies and stuff that come from it. They extrapolate so much from a short poem. I mean, there is no way that source material should have been long enough for as much as we've gotten out of it. I mean, like you said, there's an entire TV show, there's countless movies, different places all over. Um, I think it's just really interesting of how much it's become part of our, cultural makeup, and yet really isn't that long a poem.
Yeah, I mean, it's 50 pages to, well, it's shorter than that. I think it's like 45. Mine had 50 pages because it has a little bit extra. But the Headless Horseman, I think, is on 3 pages. They do talk about him at the party, and Brahm is there, and that's where he kind of adds in that he was racing, you know, the Headless Horseman. And of course, like going towards the end, whenever people talk about him, there's all these like assumptions where he is. But people, Irving writes that whenever people bring it up to Brahm, he's always like, he almost seems like he knows more about the situation. That's why I think he just straight up murdered the dude and washed his body down the river.
I could see it, and it's just a story of revenge and such instead of anything
Yeah.
spooky.
Yeah, because it plays off almost like a love story. Like he's trying to court this, Kate, and it's not working. He gets rejected, and then he's going through the dark woods at night by himself. He's been told all these stories, so his mind starts seeing all these things. And then they do kind of play with this in the movie. We'll get to it where Brom, for one point, is the Headless Horseman in Tim Burton's.
I think it's interesting that for Tim Burton's reputation for who he is, his movie still had like a happier ending than the original story.
Yeah, Crane definitely gets a better ending in his than and so does the Horseman, He gets his head back. Spoiler
Yeah, the
warning.
Horseman is almost shown as a sympathetic character by the end of the movie almost.
Right. Which makes sense. Well, all right, so we've talked about the poem. It's kind of interesting because again, as far as the movie, there's some bits and pieces that come from it, but again, like David said, there's not a lot that you can really base this off. This would be like a Twilight Zone episode, like 20 minutes, if that, if you followed the actual source material. David, do you want to talk? We kind of did with Halloween Town. Do you want to talk about the Sleepy Hollow today? I mean, you talked about it a little bit, but do you want to describe some of those locations that people can go to?
Yeah, of course, the best place to start is, where Washington Irving's grave is. It gets so much attention that it's even kind of fenced off. It's like a small steel fence. You still see everything, but they don't want people over there messing with it. But you'll see on there, in that same cemetery, they have the bridge that the Headless Horseman supposedly like rode over that you could hear him on. You can go and visit where Washington Irving lived and conceivably where he wrote it. That's definitely a spot to visit. And I let me see what the name was, but I know it was not originally called Sleepy Hollow, and they've named it that after how popular all of this became. Let's see, original name. Let's see. Okay, it used to be North Tarrytown. And then in 1996, it was renamed officially to Sleepy Hollow. So when he wrote it, Sleepy Hollow was not even a real place. But he took all the inspiration, everything he wrote from there.
Hey, I love it though. I love when towns come together around something. We've seen with Roswell, we see it with Point Pleasant. I
Salem.
love Salem, yeah, where they build in some of this like mythology into just their everyday. It makes it fun, you know.
And what's really cool is you can also see graves of other people that he based characters on, such as Kate and things like that. You can go and find those graves in that same cemetery. And then, of course, throughout the town, they've got different headless horseman statues and things like that up. Like they're very proud of their tie to history.
Kind of going into this, we know how social media works. Anytime you start researching some stuff, it shows you more ads for it. So I found out recently that Texas has their own headless horseman. David, have you heard of the Texas headless horseman?
Is it something like El Muerto or something? Like I don't remember
Yeah,
the name, but it's like supposed to
something
be like the
near El Paso.
personification of death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, this is a whole headless horseman like extended universe.
I feel like horseman, that motif, I feel like it's all over culture. And it might even go all the way back to like biblical with the four horsemen.
Mm.
Um, I think that Sleepy Hollow TV series, I think that was one of their catches was that the Headless Horseman was one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse or something like that. Um, so it definitely a menacing figure on a horse has been a very strong, prevalent character throughout literature, mythology, history, whatever you want to put.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen even Tolkien use it in his books,
Exactly.
the sound of the hoofbeats and stuff, getting the characters nervous. So, all right, so we'll go around. Grayson, have you seen any other Sleepy Hollow material or just the Burton one?
I've seen. I honestly, this was my first time seeing the Burton one, but I've seen this. I've seen the Disney's Sleepy Hollow movie. And then I tried to get into Sleepy Hollow, the TV show, like when it came out back in the day. Didn't really get into it too much, but honestly, this was yeah. But I've seen like the major stuff, like the Disney and the Tim Burton one, obviously. So
One of the first ones I remember is there was an old comic with Dr. Crane from Batman being related, and that's where he kind of got all his craziness from. So it was like a Batman tie-in with Sleepy Hollow, which was kind of interesting. As far as for me, I've seen like the cartoon Disney one, and then this one. I've seen it 3 times, I think now. And Sam, what about you?
This is my first time watching this one.
I like that. We've had first perspectives on both movies so far. David, what about you? How much? I mean, we've talked about it a little bit, but how far have you gone down the Headless Horseman rabbit hole?
I definitely did a little research before we went out to actual Sleepy Hollow since I was going to be there. Looked into that, and then of course, growing up, I've seen a couple iterations. Definitely, the Disney one was probably one of my first, the cartoon. Which again, they do stay pretty true to the very grisly ending of Mr. Ichabod Crane. I've read the original poem itself, of course, and I did like the Burton movie for what it was. I thought it was fine. I never really. I think I watched maybe one episode of the TV show, and I thought it was ridiculous that they had turned it into a cop drama for the modern age. But you know, people do what they do. Yeah, I a decent amount. I mean, nothing that I've ever done too big of like a deep dive into, but I think it's an interesting part of American history and literature as a whole, just where it comes from and the different iterations that it inspires.
Well, and earlier you kind of mentioned like it was one of our first like horror stories. It's almost like our version of Robin Hood, where Robin Hood was kind of like loosely based on a couple different people, where the author kind of like rolled it together. This is kind of like based on his hometown, and I'm sure there's some like urban legends and stuff he heard that he kind of rolled into his story. So that's kind of fun. Grayson, do you want to give a brief synopsis on the most Harry Potter slash Star Warsy version of Sleepy Hollow?
I can give the synopsis. I gotta backtrack in my mind here for a second. So definitely take some liberties with the Sleepy Hollow story, where Ichabod Crane is no longer a English teacher that's been recently put into the town of Sleepy Hollow. He is now a detective, and in much the way of the early 2000s, he is no longer a man trying to just go along with what the system says is the right way of doing investigation. He is trying to lead the way with pathology and what became modern day uses for investigating a crime scene. So he goes and tries to, he is the odd man out in the crowd of all of his other fellow, investigators and policemen of New York. So in order to they kind of pull a hot fuzz and push him out of the way of the city and put him into a rural community town and let him go investigate his way of what was reported to be 2 grisly deaths that we see at the beginning of the film. Because the more that I'm talking about this, the more that I'm starting to remember it. And he is there to see what happened and try to get to the bottom of the case. And in such, he gets introduced to the main town leaders and patriarchs, that of being the one of the man that he is staying with being one of the main leaders, where he was one of the lead farmers, I believe. And then he meets the priest, the notary, and the doctor, who were all, kind of hinted at, or that you'll have to see whether or not they are the Headless Horseman or if it's really, a supernatural being throughout the course of the story. And without getting too much away before we get too deep into it, that's pretty much what I think for the synopsis of the story.
Yeah, no, I think that does a pretty good job. One thing I thought was interesting was I think it was the studio wanted Crane to be more of a hero type, and they wanted like Brad Pitt or something. And of course, Tim Burton works with Johnny Depp. That's a given at this point. But it was a lot of depth where he was like, no, he should be, scared. Like, this is not something that he's used to. Because they wanted someone to come in and just kind of be like, that hero archetype or whatever. And so a lot of what we see from Crane in this movie was Johnny Depp's say, which I thought was interesting. Also, let me pull up the cast because I mentioned it is the most Harry Potter slash Star Warsy uh Sleepy Hollow we could have got, and that's just mainly because the actors we got in here. And we'll name a couple. Oh, and of course the great Christopher Walken was in here. He maybe not his best role, but he's in here for sure.
I think it's hilarious that they got such like a known name to be like, so look, you're not gonna have a head for like the whole movie, but
You're gonna be in like 2 scenes and you might have like one word. It might be ah. All right, so of course we said Johnny Depp, but let's get into who we got. We got Ian McDiarmid himself. He plays he's the notary. But Emperor Palpatine. Christopher Lee's in here as well. He plays the judge, so Count Dooku. Michael Gambon, who is of course Dumbledore, is Baltus Van Tassel. Who was Alfred? Michael Gow?
I think so. Yeah, the
no,
notary.
Michael Gow's the notary. That's right.
I do have to say this to you real quick. If you look at the poster for it, got the iconic tagline, heads will roll. So, hey, they leaned into it.
Hey, they, at least it delivered on, what they said would happen. Oh man, who am I missing? Dudley. Who's Dudley's actor, David?
Are you talking about Richard Griffiths?
Yes. Yeah.
There you go.
As well as when the horseman is headless, he is played by one Ray Park, so Darth Maul. So yeah, there we go. The most Star Warsy / Harry Potter, because of course Johnny Depp was in Fantastic Beasts for one whole movie.
So something historical that I forgot to mention. For the last 20 years of his life, which would have been after this story had come out, Edgar Allan Poe lived like 15, 20 miles away from where it was written and everything. I wonder if anything that he wrote was inspired by this kind of more macabre, dark story.
Yeah, it's very possible. I mean, we all know the legend of Edgar Allan Poe as far as like, man, that guy was a hoot. Just like, I don't even know how to describe him, but his poems. I mean, they named a whole football team after him in Baltimore. But yeah, I mean, I could definitely see that because when was Poe around?
It was for that same time period.
Yeah. And it's similar themes, and horror wasn't like a big thing.
Yeah,
back
he
then.
was 1809 to 1849.
Okay, so he lived 29 years after this one was made.
Exactly. So, especially because you can't imagine there was that many people writing in that genre in America at that time, especially doing poems.
Yeah, that's why Poe himself kind of stood out. Was he was kind of doing things that people were like, "Wow, that's really you shouldn't be doing that." But now we're like, "Man, he was ahead of his time."
Exactly.
So yeah, no, it's an interesting note there, and yeah. So going into the movie, we'll start with you, David. Any scenes that really stuck out to you?
I don't know if anything stuck out in particular, but I think it's because they did a good job of making it a smooth story. Again, with something that has such little source material, but you still got to keep true to that kind of story. They did a great job of lengthening it without adding too much that you're just like, well, that's superfluous. There's no reason for that. They did a really good job of putting that in there. Kind of like you mentioned, I think Johnny Depp's take on Ichabod Crane was interesting. I do agree that the typical hero role would not have fit this. He was supposed to be kind of a gangly, awkward teacher kind of character, more intelligent than anything. So I thought that was pretty well done. I don't know if I would have picked Johnny Depp, but he still did okay. Past that, I did like they definitely were not afraid to go for it with the whole like portal to hell and all that, like very, very dove into the supernatural. Whereas I feel like, I mean, as we discussed, we're not even sure if there was a horseman. I feel like the poem definitely left it up to like, was it real? Was it not? Was it his imagination? This one, they threw that all aside and were like, yep, this is what's going on. He's from hell, he's mad, and all that, which is great. But they did a good job of the effects without it ruining the mood of the movie and the time period of it. So, yeah, I mean, I think it was pretty well done for what they did.
Yeah, no, I have to agree. And, I enjoy what they've pulled from the source material. Like I said, there's, the part with Brahm. So for anyone that thought maybe he was the horseman the whole time, they kind of give you that, ah ha ha, there, we did that scene. But then the church is still in there, much like the poem. And you do get some of these scenes, and of course the horseman throwing the pumpkin. So that was fun. Grayson, any scene that stood out to you?
Yeah, not to spoil the deep dive completely, but the way I want to describe the scene is at the very end. It's the reskinning scene. That sticks out to me just because the animation is a little dated. Still looks really cool though, but it is, you can see the pixels in it. It's pretty of the time is the word I'm looking for, I guess. But yeah, honestly, it was an interesting movie. It was definitely very early Tim Burton, where he still had like a lot of the creative juices there. He was trying a lot of like just out of left field stuff to see what stuck, and it was imaginative in the stuff that it did use, and it was very it was Tim Burton in his element, without a doubt. So I think this, like, if you wanted to see, like, if you liked some of the other Halloween movies that he did or produced, like, Nightmare Before Christmas, or even Edward Scissorhands or anything else like that, this is like peak. And like, you don't really want something that's like, childish, but you're looking for like an adult thing. This is definitely the way to go if you want to see Burton stuff still.
Yeah, and speaking of the animation there, it kind of reminded me of The Mask. So, just with the tongue coming out and everything, I was like, that seems like it's from The Mask. Sam, what about you? Any scene?
I had a couple. One was Crane's dreams, and then also the part where the horseman threw, or like the fake horseman threw the pumpkin head.
Hmm.
Those two were just like, oh, they did the classic thing.
Yeah, no, the scene I always remembered, and I remembered it as a kid, was just the scene in the church, especially we'll get to it, but harpooning, which is like, damn, just right through the window. All right, so going forward, we will have spoilers because what's going to happen at this point. We've kind of given you a brief synopsis. So, David, was there anything perhaps you didn't like about this?
I guess it, again, because it was such short source material, they did have to elongate and add some stuff in, which was fine. But I don't know if I feel like some of the scary part of the Horseman is the unknown of where he's from or what he's after, what's going on. It's kind of scarier just to have like, hey, there's this evil guy out there and he wants somebody's head. He wants to kill, take it, that's it. Not that there's like a way to beat him or set him free or any of that. So a little of that. I mean, I get that they did that so that the movie would work, so I don't hold it against them. But in my opinion, I think that a thing that's evil just to be evil or just has its own reasoning for doing something and is kind of unknown, I feel like that mystery adds to the fear a little bit more. And I would have loved to have seen Ichabod Crane end up the same way as in the poem and, be done with him. I mean, and again, for a movie, not the most satisfying ending. But I also feel like Ichabod had a little bit more hubris in the poem, and I think that kind of led to his downfall, which was more of a morality lesson, which back then was, of course, a huge thing to put into everything. But his ego got the best of him, and that's why he died, be it by the horseman or by his rival or whoever. But I would have totally dug the ending of the movie being, Johnny Depp's head being taken off and becoming the new horseman, basically.
Would have been interesting. Grayson, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly agree with David on a lot of what he said. Like, the ending was, as he brought out, like, the mystery and like the overall like mysticism behind, the Headless Horseman, with him being, this all-powerful being that he doesn't have a head, but he goes around killing people, can feed into, folklore, like what happened with Braun, even Brahm dressing up as him to scare Ichabod in this movie and in the story. And then it's, once you kind of give like that semblance of like vulnerability, or like him showing that he's becoming, corporeal, and giving him like that, human body back. It kind of takes out, you know, a little bit of that like overwhelming power that you kind of have to face, and it takes away a lot of the as David said, like the agency of the character of the Headless Horseman. It should be able to do its own thing, because if we're going to give him that kind of power now that he has been given back the symbol of his head back, he should still be able to make his own choices to do as he wishes, instead of like a vengeance plot that ends up working out for everybody at the end. But honestly, for most of it, it was totally fine. I think like a lot of the side stories that were like the red herrings that were included, like, you know, the witchcraft and the, you know, just like the possible suspects throughout the movie were a little bit like, they were well constructed, but it feels like they were kind of a second thought to kind of like misdirect everybody into fill up 2 hours of a movie instead of, you know, focusing more on what they wanted to focus on. So it felt a little, you know, secondarily added, but I think it was good just for what it was, to kind of keep that air of tension and, you know, presence in there.
Yeah, for me, I mean, we've seen this a lot with movies recently where the big bad turns out to not really be the big bad. We've seen it with Bane in The Dark Knight Rises, but the Headless Horseman not doing everything by his own volition and being like controlled, kind of fell flat. But it worked for the story that they were telling. So I mean, it wasn't the worst thing, but sometimes you got to nitpick movies to find something that you would change.
I mean, from seeing it for the first time, probably not. I thought it was good encompassing of like a lot of different things in there. So I thought it was good.
Yeah, so we find out sort of early on that the Horseman is only attacking certain people. At first, it seems kind of random, but then, especially the scene where he kills, I don't even know who was that guy that he kills with the long, like reddish hair, and then Braun is there and Crane, and they're like fighting him, but he doesn't really want to kill them. He just ends up killing him because they wouldn't stop. But
Are you
that's
talking about like the Watchmen?
Yeah.
Did we do that? Yeah. If we wanted to like dig into it, I think he was like involved in like he was one of the witnesses on the notary that started the whole, you know, thing.
Yeah.
So that's why he got killed.
Yeah. So we find out sort of early on that the Horseman's being controlled, or he has a mission. So you're not quite sure why. But I do enjoy the scene with Depp waking up and he was like, it was a Headless Horseman. And Gammon's like, yeah, that's what we told you. Everyone told you. So there's a little bit of comedy sprinkled in. As far as like red herrings go, David, when you watch this, did any of them stick out to you like they were going to be the one controlling the Horseman?
No, but I think that's because I had already seen so much before in the original source material that I thought the red herring was more than anybody was controlling it, and that it was just going to be the horse had its own, you know, killing thing. So for me, the red herring was thinking that the horseman was controlling himself.
Yeah, see, I thought the Horseman was just killing people that were related to whoever had killed him originally. It's kind of was when I first saw.
Right, like some kind of like a revenge plot or something. But I thought it was of his own volition that he was like, all right, I'm gonna take out this one, and that's what, you know, I didn't think that it was somebody pulling his strings.
Right. Grayson, what about you? Any red herrings stand out to you during this?
Pretty much the same as you guys. Just I thought it was going to be, you know, for some reason the Horseman had come back, and you know, he's killing people for some reason at this point in time, right? As Ichabod Crane's coming to the town. But one of the red herrings that honestly kind of got to me was I definitely thought with the way they were building the story up, with it being Van Tassel or Michael Gambone's character, I thought it was going to be more like, you know, trying to control the wealth of the town in order to like make himself more wealthy, because it was kind of, you know, built up with that being a thing because of how he had like parties there, and he was the most parties at his house and the most prominent figure in the town. Plus, he had Ichabod Crane stay with him, and you could assume that that was to keep an eye on the investigation. So I thought that was definitely one of the more. That's the one that I ended up like believing the most up until the end of the movie.
Sam, what about you? Any of the herrings stand out to you?
Probably the two girls at the beginning when like the story was told. That was like something that was going to be brought back up later. I would have assumed.
Yeah, this movie is actually kind of good. Of you see random things and you're like, why did they include that? Early on, you see like the people making out when Crane pops up, and you're like, that's kind of a weird thing to put in, but it does come back, and you're like, oh, okay. You know, back in the time when movies actually try to bring everything full circle, so that was kind of nice. I'm surprised no one said anything about Kate and the evil eye. Because they definitely try to lean into that one, it seems like, with Crane finding it under his bed, and then her doing it in the church when, the horseman's attacking. Of course, we find out it's like a protection spell or something, but
Yeah, I was gonna say it's like as quickly as they tried to set that up, they just as quickly, tore it down by saying it's a protection, rune.
yeah. Yeah, I don't know. That definitely seemed like one. So, the city was full of just like people making bad choices, it seemed like, though. Like everyone was just doing bad things. And then who's revealed to be controlling the horseman, Grayson?
I don't remember her name, but it's
The
Mrs.
stepmom.
Van. Yeah, Mrs. Van Tassel, the little lady that Michael Gambon just married. You want me to go into like the more depth on that, or is that?
I don't know. Do we need to go more? No, I'm
I
just
think you got it. Yep. And,
Yeah, I'm
and the
like-
horseman gets kissed. And
I was
takes
just
her to hell.
pretty much. Yeah, I was just making sure you didn't want anything else on top of that.
Yeah, can you tell us about her childhood?
Absolutely. So, little girl one that broke the stick.
Yeah, so speaking of the scene Sam was, yeah, little girls, turns out her and her sister, and they saw the horseman be killed, and then this is where this like whole plot of like a deal with the devil and like controlling the horseman to get what she wanted, seemed kind of convoluted. Again, I don't know. It's a movie, so it wasn't the worst thing. Uh, I don't know. It's just an interesting take, and they do have the red herring of like maybe she got killed, and because they show the horseman coming up behind her, and then of course later we see this, her hand cut, and we see the dead body at the morgue have the hand cut too, which we find out was the servant Sarah. So her going missing also came back. She was in two whole scenes, and she actually served a whole purpose. David, as far as like acting goes, how did you think the acting in this one was?
I mean, I thought it was great. As you mentioned, it's a lot of alum from franchises we've all seen and loved, like Star Wars, Harry Potter, etc. And they got there by being great actors, In particular, Ray Park playing the Horseman, just like with Darth Maul, didn't say anything, still got across a lot of that physical emotion and things like that, very menacing. They did a great job. Again, the only one I'd have any issues with, I guess, would be Johnny Depp, but not because he did bad acting. Just I don't know if that's exactly how I would do Ichabod Crane, but he made his choice and went with it. And acting-wise, I think he did fantastic. I can't point to anybody and say that they dropped the ball here. I think Burton does a great job of getting the most out of his actors in all of his movies. They're weird, wild movies all the time, but I can never say anybody didn't act their ass off in his movies, even if it's very bizarre choices they go for sometimes.
Well, to kind of roll with our theme from Halloween Town, what if Jeff Goldblum played Crane?
Perfection. I think he would have fit maybe a little younger, Jeff Goldblum. I think he actually would have fit the role really well, that kind of awkwardness, but still really into his own intelligence kind of thing. He would have been great for the Crane that dies.
100%. Yeah, but Jeff Goldblum sitting there being like, so she was murdered and she doesn't have a head. Interesting. No, I mean, honestly, if Jeff Goldblum was in that movie, I think they would have had to go a very different way where, as David said, where it's him dying at the end of the story. I gotta say, honestly, just with the whole, like, I was cool with like the fact that they made him like a detective in this point in time because it definitely made more sense for the movie. But as David brought out too, it was a little. Johnny Depp played this as like a combination of Jack Sparrow, Edward Scissorhands, and like it felt like almost like the same thing of what would become Sweeney Todd. You know what I mean? It was very much like it felt like he was playing it felt like he was playing another version of the character he'd already played for Tim Burton.
Yeah, it's just like he picked little pieces and crammed them together and was like, that's a character, right?
Well, and they seemed like it was a little Sherlock Holmes-y as well.
They definitely leaned into that a little hard for that for this movie.
Which is interesting because he was supposed to just be an English teacher.
Right. Well, and so Sam had mentioned like his nightmares. So his nightmares were about his mom, right? And his mom had actually gotten tortured by the people that he's now working for, right?
Maybe.
That's kind of what I got from it. But I'm like,
Yeah.
are these real? Is it not? Like, I don't know.
They never really answered that.
Yeah. You know what that means? Just like Beetlejuice, we're gonna get Sleepy Hollow.
Sleepier Hollow.
The sleepiest Hollow. Just
The heads will roll again.
Heads will continue to roll.
Actually, it's going to be like the new trend. We're going to see the Horseman, and he's going to be a super sympathetic character, even though he's like murdering everybody.
It's actually going to be the origins of the Horseman back to the French Revolution. That's where he got his fascination with heads coming off, you know? He used
Just
to
seeing
be
Christopher,
the executioners.
seeing Christopher Walken talking with a German accent, be like, "So I was doing this with my pointy teeth. I came all the way over here, why? Because I am a huntsman. I want your head." Yeah, no, that'll be. See, now it just needs to be made as a comedy. I would pay to see that movie all day, every day. I don't care.
Well, I'm actually kind of certain they are remaking Sleepy Hollow. I don't know any facts about it, but
I
put money down on Timothy Chalamet being Ichabod Crane without a doubt.
He could do it.
Yeah, that actually wouldn't be bad.
I mean, I'm still waiting for that great like one adaptation that becomes the one that's like the signature one that everybody points to as the best of it. And I don't think Sleepy Hollow's had it yet.
I mean, I think currently this is probably it, but it's not very faithful.
But there's still so much that can be changed. There's none that's been like, oh man, I don't know how you could do that better, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, honestly, if they were to do something like, I agree. I think this is the closest we've ever had. But if they were to do something like, what am I trying to think of? There was, if I can remember the movie that I'm thinking of, I'll say it. But it's like, I'm just thinking of like making it that new teacher that just moved into town type situation. And they start hearing the lore of the town. And then.
Disney's dinosaur.
Exactly. But just doing something like that, I forget if I can remember the movie, I'll say it, but I can't think of it right now. But just something like that to kind of build the tension all the way through, and then have Ichabod die. I think that would definitely be the way to go about doing it.
All right. So as far as the remake goes, it looks like Pet Sematary Bloodlines writer-director Lindsay Anderson Beer will deliver a fresh take on Washington Irving's classic. It was announced in 2022, but nothing's come of it. It's by Paramount.
Is it going to go to theaters, or is this a Paramount Plus thing or something?
No, I think it'll go to theaters because I think Pet Sematary did. Both of them.
I don't think Bloodlines did.
It didn't?
I don't think so. Let me check.
It might be a Paramount then. It was announced in 2022, so yeah. There's nothing about the cast yet. Okay, let's see. Yeah, everything I can still see is it's still happening, but nothing as far as casting.
Yeah, Bloodlines was distributed on Paramount Plus.
Whew. All right, so probably won't be getting Timothy Chalamet for that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think somebody will eventually. I'd say within the next 10 to 15 years, we will get like the definitive great version of it. I just don't think it's quite there yet.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say like how you would do it faithfully while still trying to make it spooky. Because like the original one has its spooky elements, but again, it's mainly a love story. And so, will fans be disappointed when they go for a Sleepy Hollow movie if it's super faithful?
I think you could do them both justice, but it has to be a tragic love story.
Mhm. Romeo and Juliet type of love story.
No, because those guys were idiots and they could have stopped it.
I mean, one of them for sure. Like, what? Didn't have to do that. All right. Well, Grayson, Alfred wasn't the only one returning from Batman. Danny Elfman is also here helming the score. How did you enjoy the score?
I mean, just like every Danny Elfman composition, it's hard to say you don't like it. You may like not be interested in every single piece, but I think Danny Elfman really did do a fantastic job of giving it like old gothic, like, feeling to the entire project. You didn't really feel like anything was out of place. It was very much atmospheric and built the movie up. You could feel like, the roots in like classical music that Danny was going for, like that deeply haunting, melancholic type of sound. Like that he usually does really well, especially for Tim Burton projects.
Yeah, the score definitely stood out. I mean, this one it just has a feel about it. And so I think it while it's not super faithful, it feels very something I'd watch around Halloween. Again, perhaps that's why we're talking about it right now. David, going into cinematography and kind of effects, how did you feel about this one?
They shot it really well. I do like, they did a lot of the classic kind of horror trope scenes with the angles and stuff, but not so much that it was cheesy or overdone. It was, it was Tim Burton, so everything was tinted a little darker than it probably needed to be. And that's just what you're going to get with Tim Burton, I think. I also think that maybe as cool as like the portal to hell and everything was, maybe if things were a little more practical effects, but I'm going to feel that way about almost every movie. I'm a huge fan of practical effects. I think when you do them right, those look so much better than CGI almost anything. So yeah, no, they did a really good job. I think the Horseman looked great for the moments that he was there. Definitely a menacing figure that if you saw out on the road at night, you would be terrified. And piggybacking on what Grayson said, the score, I think the score was awesome. Danny Elfman does fantastic work, especially with Burton. I actually met him earlier this year. Very nice guy. Big fan of everything he does.
Yeah, some pretty iconic scores. I mean, just name the movie and you can think of the score from him. Even when they brought him back for some of the more recent movies that didn't do so well, but you still are like, hey, I know that score.
Didn't he do the score in Multiverse of Madness, I think?
He did. I'm pretty sure he did.
With Sam Raimi, right? He came back for, yeah. So he's even done Marvel stuff.
And see, I didn't mind Multiverse of Madness.
No, I thought it was great. And I think he did the original Spider-Man too with Toby. I think that was
he did.
He did the music for those too.
And of course, Batman.
Which is like the most iconic Batman soundtrack we've ever had still.
Yeah, and apparently it came from an earlier material. I'd have to research where I found it, but there's something earlier that he was inspired by. And if you listen to it, you're like, oh yeah, I can hear Batman in that, which is pretty interesting. Sam, how did you think this one looked and sound?
I thought it was really well done. Like the dark scenes that they wanted dark were dark. The only interesting thing that I would probably bring up would be like the smoke that put out the 4 lanterns in a row in like the beginning area. It seemed very, I don't know, gave off like kind of witchy vibes, which kind of gave it away for me a little bit.
See, I think this movie does that really well as far as planting little things and actually paying it off. Like, I hadn't watched this in quite some time, probably since it came out on DVD. Like, I remember watching it when it first came out, but I had forgotten the majority of it. And I was like, oh, it's kind of neat that everything comes back around, like a lot of it. Sometimes in movies, I mean, not sometimes, a lot of movies today, it doesn't happen that way. We've kind of talked on like it's dark and stuff. I don't know. Has everyone just watched like the original release? I guess no one's watched the new 25th anniversary release that they just released, right? Okay. Yeah, I was going to mention anyone listening, if you guys want, there is a brand new 4K Blu-ray restoration of Sleepy Hollow out. So maybe at some point we'll watch that and see how the picture looks. Hopefully they didn't mess with it too much because certain things are supposed to be atmospheric, and sometimes when you make it look too pretty, it just doesn't come off the same.
Would that be potentially the one on Prime? Because if so, then I may have watched it. I don't know.
I don't know because probably not
No, the one
because
on
you
Prime,
can't
I believe,
stream
is the
4K.
original.
Okay.
Yeah,
Because I didn't really read if it was that one because I was like, I mean, maybe I did. I don't know.
Yeah, no, you can't stream above 2K, so it wouldn't be the 4K one anyway. And if it has special effects, they can't do anything. Like the Avengers movies, don't buy 4K because with all the special effects, they can't actually render it in 4K. So save your money. But yeah, Grayson, kind of your final thoughts on this film.
Yeah. So honestly, if you haven't seen the movie like I didn't when I first went into this, definitely worth a shot. It's, classic Tim Burton, really imaginative, really, just outside the box type of, filmmaking, look, cinematography, shot composition. But at the same time, it's, your run of the mill Tim Burton story, action, adventure, love, weird horror, gothic elements as well. Definitely the trope of the weird outsider being rejected by society only until, he shows that he's right. And then, but I really liked it. I think good way to set the tone for, the season, especially as it starts getting dark earlier. A lot of fun to kind of like picture yourself in that same kind of setting, especially if you like shut all the lights off and watch that in the dark. It'll give you the heebie-jeebies here and there, but that's kind of the point, right? So yeah, I thought it was really good.
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe if you guys want us to, at some point, the four of us will get together. You can join us and we'll watch Sleepy Hollow in Sleepy Hollow. See? Just tell us in the comments below. We'll do it. Grayson, too, before we hand it off to the others, where does this rank in the Tim Burton pantheon of films?
Do you want me to list like as like my top one or like top list or whatever? Or you want just like the overall rating?
Well, just before we get to rating, like compared to his other films, like what films would this be nearest to in your rankings?
Honestly, I would say this is definitely up there with like 89 Batman, Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and honestly, I would even say probably either Edward Scissorhands or at least the top like 3 of his career for sure.
Sam, what are your final thoughts on this film?
Final thoughts, even though I've watched it for the first time, understand why Keegan owns it on DVD, Blu-ray, and 4K Blu-ray, along with bought it on Prime as well to own that copy. So I don't believe you. No, I see why he owned it. It's definitely a really good one. I enjoyed it. It was interesting to see this take a pose from just the Scooby-Doo version of I've seen, where it was a man in a suit.
I mean, that's usually the case for him, except for like that trilogy they did where it was like actually real. Mm-hmm. Like there's the real aliens and then the real zombies. Mm-hmm. Nessie wasn't real, was she? Was that just a machine?
No, there was a real one. Yeah.
Okay.
Because I remember like the movies.
Yeah, because the aliens were a red herring, but then there was real aliens anyway in that one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll talk about that sometime because that's a.
I like the Witches of Salem. That was the best one, where it was actually the ghost witch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the witch's ghost.
Mm-hmm. What about the cyber one? Did anyone enjoy that one?
I loved the cyber one.
What about the one with Scrappy Doo, Sam?
I did enjoy it until recently.
Until we watched like an 11-hour marathon of them. All right, David.
11-hour marathon, and then you were proclaiming a bag as Scrappy Doo and was like super convinced about it.
Oh man, it looked just like Scrappy Doo.
No, it didn't. It did not.
David, what about you? Final thoughts, and where would this rank in your pantheon of Tim Burton films?
I'm gonna have to agree with Grayson. I think it's definitely on that kind of I'd say top 5 of his. Definitely up there with the ranks of things like I would actually put it right above probably Edward Scissorhands. Just so my top one's probably Nightmare Before Christmas. That would probably be my favorite Burton related project. That or Beetlejuice, probably at a tie there. No, it was a really good take on a classic story. As we've discussed, it's not how I would have done it, but it still was done very well. They definitely set the mood correctly. There was a lot more good than bad. Overall, I would probably say 7 to 7.5.
Grayson, what about you? What's your rating?
Yeah, honestly, I'd give it probably 7.9, 8. Yeah, just go with 8. That's top tier entertainment for me. I just really like the ingenuity of it and just something new. It's probably because just back in the day, this was reminds me of the earlier times and when people actually put a lot of effort into making practical effects and movies actually entertaining and enjoyable, even if the story or the plot's not super coherent, but it's still enjoyable enough to sit through. So yeah, I'm gonna put it at an 8.
Sam, what about you? What's your rating?
I would probably go with a 10 because it throws suspects at you where you're just like, okay, maybe this one, but then you're just like, okay, never mind, he just died. And it just I don't know, it was kind of like a journey, and like we've talked about the whole time, there was lots of hints towards other things, and you're just like, I don't know, I definitely enjoyed it.
Yeah, so for me, I guess the final thoughts, I think it's a pretty solid film that holds up pretty well. There's a couple kind of wonky CGI stuff, but for the most part, especially the atmospheric part, it just feels like what we think of for Burton. Like Burton's gotten kind of wonky. He does stray from the source material, but we saw how his Planet of the Apes went when he actually stayed true to the source material. People hated it. So maybe that's a good thing he didn't stay true to the source material here. And, the sound, as far as the score by Danny Elfman, just the look, the acting, there's some comedy. I think it's a solid film. I'd probably give it an 8.5 out of 10. What did you say?
Because I was holding up a 6. But
no, it's definitely better than a 6. This is one I'm surprised I don't watch more, especially around Halloween time. So I'm glad we, did it for this Halloween season. Speaking of Halloween season, David, if anyone wants some fun, spooky, abnormal voyages, where can they find out?
They can find that on our YouTube channel, which can be found at youtube.com/abnormalvoyages. Also got our Instagram to keep up with new posts and such. We got some really awesome stuff together for Halloween season. We just started putting those out, and we'll have a couple more before the end of the month.
And Grayson, if people want to follow you, where can they do that?
The _Grayman, GRAE. Yeah, nothing, Halloween themed or anything like that, unfortunately. But, if you want to see some cool drawings every, 6 months, yay, stop on by.
And Sam, perhaps if they want a spooky tour of a certain town we live in, where can they do that?
Yeah, if you want to see a spooky ghost tour of Castle Rock, where we go to a couple places that we have actually investigated, and a couple of us have actually had personal experiences at. You can find that on Culz Paranormal Studios.
Yeah, we're trying to have some fun for the Halloween season. We haven't really done this before, so it's kind of fun. And next week we'll be doing another film. Sam, what film will we be doing next week?
We will be doing Brandon's favorite, even though he's not here, Trick or Treat.
Oh, Brandon, where are you? Yeah, we'll be doing Trick or Treat. There's an older version, I guess, because I pulled it up and I was like, no, this is definitely the wrong one. It's the 2007 version. It's sort of like an anthology, but not. So join us next week for that. But until next time, guys, for more Culz Reviews deep dives, click that link to your left. For more about us here at Culz Paranormal, click the link to your right. If you want to see more Halloween spooky season stuff, click that link to your bottom left. Don't forget to hit that like, give us a subscribe. and let us know what's your favorite iteration of the Sleepy Hollow story. Tell us in the comments below.